The lights in the CNN studio were harsh and unflinching, white, sterile, and humming faintly like the tension in the room. You could almost taste the electricity in the air, thick with anticipation and ambition. Outside, rain battered the streets of Washington, D.C., a steady rhythm against glass windows that felt like the heartbeat of a restless nation. Inside, 3 chairs sat under the glare of a spotlight. In them, Tulsi Gabbard, John Kennedy of Louisiana, and the moderator who had the unenviable job of trying to keep the political wildfire from burning the whole stage down. Tulsi Gabbard sat upright, shoulders squared. Her hair was sharp, just like her eyes focused, unwavering. A veteran, a former congresswoman, and a fierce independent thinker, she had always walked a tightrope between the two political worlds. Loved by some on the right, feared by many on the left, she carried a fire inside her. That fire was burning tonight. Opposite her was Senator John Kennedy, a man as wily as he was unpredictable, folksy and sharp-tongued. He had a southern charm that could disarm you before slicing you clean with a one-liner. Beneath his slow drawl was a razor-sharp intellect that played dumb only to lure in the overconfident. Kennedy had seen his share of political storms, but tonight was different. Tonight he had something to prove. The topic of the night, Donald Trump and the future of American conservatism, a question hung between them like a fuse waiting for a spark. Tulsi struck the match first. You know, Senator Kennedy, it's fascinating how we keep talking about Trump like he's the savior of America, she said, her voice steady but cold. But we never talk about what he's done to fracture our political soul, how he's turned truth into a bargaining chip and morality into theater. The room fell into a hush. The moderator blinked. Kennedy didn't flinch. Tulsi leaned forward. I served this country. I've worn the uniform. I've seen the cost of blind loyalty to a flawed commander, and what I see in Trump isn't strength. It's fear dressed up as bravado. Kennedy inhaled slowly. He adjusted his glasses. For a moment, he looked like he might let it slide. But then his voice dropped an octave low and slow like thunder rolling in. Well, Tulsi, he said, you say you wore the uniform, and for that, I thank you. But wearing a uniform doesn't give anyone a monopoly on patriotism. I reckon you've confused being loud with being right. A ripple of laughter and gasps came from the studio audience. Tulsi's jaw tightened, but she didn't back down. You want to talk about right and wrong, Senator? Then let's talk about the Constitution, about truth, about integrity, because if the Republican Party is hitching its wagon to a man who's more interested in vengeance than vision, then we're all headed off a cliff. That was when Kennedy's tone changed. The Southern gentleman evaporated. He leaned in, locked eyes with her, and fired the question that changed the night. Tell me, Ms. Gabbard, he said, voice now like ice, when you were standing on that Democratic stage in 2020, calling out your own party for corruption, were you doing that because you believed in something, or because you knew you couldn't win and needed a new audience? Silence. Tulsi's eyes narrowed. For a heartbeat, the fire in her dimmed. There it was, the wound she didn't want opened, because behind the public persona, behind the sharp words and the poised exterior, Tulsi carried something heavier than ambition. She carried rejection. Back in 2020, she had launched her campaign not with bombast, but with belief. Belief that politics could still be a place for honor. She had spoken truth to power, even when it cost her everything. Her own party had turned on her. Doors had closed. Fundraising dried up. She was alone. She had watched younger, flashier candidates eclipse her. And deep down, part of her still bled from that. Now, facing Kennedy, that wound was exposed, and he knew it. But before she could speak, something unexpected happened. In the back row of the audience, a young man stood up. He was no political figure, no pundit, just a student from Georgetown, nervous but defiant. With all due respect, he said, "I'm tired of watching leaders tear each other apart while pretending to fight for us. You talk about Trump, about loyalty, about courage, but who's actually talking about us, about the families choosing between medicine and rent, about kids growing up in war zones overseas while we bicker here?" The room shifted. Tulsi's gaze softened. For a moment her shoulders dropped. She stood up, not to fight, but to answer. "You're right," she said quietly. "I've let my anger speak louder than my compassion tonight. That's not who I want to be. That's not why I got into this. I got into politics to protect the people who can't afford lobbyists, to stand for those left behind. But somewhere along the line, I let the battle become personal." Kennedy looked at her, and for the first time that night, he nodded, just slightly. A truce, maybe, but the real climax came not from politics, but from the deeper question: what does it mean to stand for something when the world keeps shifting beneath your feet? Backstage, after the cameras stopped rolling, Tulsi sat alone in the green room, staring at her reflection. She looked exhausted, not from the debate, but from years of fighting ghosts, both outside and within. She reached into her bag and pulled out an old photo, her unit from her deployment in Iraq. Men and women, dusty and tired, arms around each other. No politics, just purpose. She thought of her late mentor, a colonel who once told her, "Courage isn't about the fight. It's about what you're willing to lose for the sake of doing what's right." That night, as she walked out into the rain, Tulsi didn't feel victorious. She felt real, grounded, more committed than ever to finding a path that didn't lean right or left, but forward. As for Senator Kennedy, he returned to Louisiana the next day. When asked about the debate, he simply said, "We had words, but at least they were honest." And maybe that was the lesson buried beneath all the noise. That honesty, even when uncomfortable, is the first step toward healing a broken discourse. Politics may be war by other means, but if we forget the people we claim to fight for, we lose the only battle that matters. So, whether you agreed with Tulsi, Kennedy, or neither, one thing was certain: that night wasn't about Trump. It was about truth, and who still had the courage to speak it, even when it cost them everything.